My name is Eli. I am a microbiologist by training, and I don't know much about salts. Just let you know right now. I'm a learner, just like many of you may be in this room, and I actually know for certain that there are many folks who are totally professionals and know much more about these things than I do. I think the reason I'm standing here in front of you, though, is because one of the things I've discovered is that whether or not I am a scientist, I actually have a lot to learn in terms of engaging with decision makers, practitioners, and the communities that care about the environment. My background is as a biological oceanographer, so I know a little bit about salts in water. Um, and coming up here into the Hudson Valley has been really exciting for me because I had the chance now to learn about freshwater. So what I'm doing at Bard College and in the Hudson Valley is focusing on this connection between water quality and air quality, and I choose to follow the microbes. But it's a little bit like following the salts. And one of the things that I'm really interested in research-wise is looking at how salts can actually really change the bacteria, the archaea, the types of microorganisms that are in our freshwater systems that can affect our water quality, not just the water quality of the streams, but also of our own drinking water. And the way that I've started on this learning journey about salts is through my approach to science. I was out in the world for quite some time before going back to school, working in different environmental and human rights organizations before I decided to come back to be a scientist. And what I've been able to do is take the science that I've learned and connect that with my understanding of what it takes to build community, and to build a community that can work together to manage these resources. And so I'm going to share with you kind of my trajectory and what I've learned so far. And instead of giving you take-home messages, I'm actually going to leave you with some take-home questions. I hope that's okay. And I would love for you to get back to me as you think about this after you leave. So why salt? This is a picture of Leanne Walters who was a homeowner in Flint, Michigan. She was one of the folks that started ringing the alarm bells because it turns out it does not take a rocket scientist to understand that this is not the kind of water that you might need to be drinking, right? And one of the things that really strikes me about this is that what happened in Flint, Michigan did have something to do with salts in the water. Those salts were stripping out the lead and causing issues in the drinking water system. I feel like the efforts of communities and communities that are speaking up really can bring powerful change to the way that we approach the use of resources and how we apply those resources. So in trying to think about this with my colleagues, well, I should say that most of what I say here that is right comes from Kate Murdochs of Siena College and Robin Smythe from Bard College. Maybe some of it might come from me, but I just always want to acknowledge that I'm constantly presenting what is actually a collaboration of people. We were trying to think about how it is that we engage with each other around these questions. So if we're talking about salts, how do we apply them? How do we protect the environment while also honoring the fact that we have a really big responsibility when it comes to public safety? How do we communicate around this? And so as many of the speakers before have mentioned, and Laura, I thank you, it's a really great setup for me. We have a community of users, which are public and private. Those are the folks that have expectations. That's the public, right? That need to be able to get to work safely, need to be able to get their kids to school safely, are relying on our practitioners and decision makers to maintain that safety for us. So when we think about the ways that we engage here, we've got the community of users that are really kind of driving. They've got the expectations. They are sometimes electing the decision makers. So they're communicating back and forth with the decision makers around whether or not we're using salts. Then we have the environmental scientists. In our good times, we are really actively participating in policy making and helping with regulations to guide practitioners and decision makers. And sometimes we're engaging with a community of users, but I think that's something as a group we're trying to do a much better job of. And when we think about this triangle here, and we think about the expectations that are driving our use of road salts, as Laura said, it's something that we need to think about. Are those expectations actually sustainable? They are driven by expectations of these users, but it seems that we do need to shift culture to shift practices. And that and the idea that that shifting of culture would come from just one of these places on the triangle, I think we're realizing isn't going to work. Environmental scientists can jump up and down and say, you are messing up the ecology for my trout that I study. Please stop. You know, we can jump up and down and say the ecology is being degraded. You're risking collapse of ecosystems. We can do that, but it's really not actually changing culture. Same is true of the community of users, right? We can have our environmental advocates. They can talk about why they care about it, you know, and say that it should stop. But unless we have this full communication with each other, all three parts of that, we really can't shift our culture of use. So my suggestion is that if we need a shared forum, it seems that, and in the Hudson Valley we have a great history of this, it seems that citizen science could establish that forum for us all to come together. And I want to, you don't have to take my word for it, but I just kind of want to walk you through my experience as a scientist, and I'll talk to you, well, I'll tell you about some of the citizen science that I've been involved in to date so you can see this in action. But first I want to tell you how my ideas have shifted just in engaging in the citizen science aspect of this question. First of all, as an environmental scientist, I've always known that salts probably weren't great for the aquatic environment. But, and this is full disclosure, I still sometimes use them on my front porch. Okay? So, I am very aware that yes, it's not great, but also what are the alternatives? After all, it is my responsibility to make sure that I don't make the post person risk life and limb to put their letters in my mailbox, right? It really isn't fair to do that. So I have a responsibility. I have my own personal interstate highway in front of my house that I need to manage, and I need to manage it well, right? So, and do I always have the time to apply it before something happens? Am I always paying attention? No, although I'm going to consider some pre-wedding, I think, after this. So I'm going to try that out. But the other thing is that right in front of my house, I might not have mountain sheep, but I do have 4-year-olds that think that chunks of salt are actually salt. You know, I have people's pets that are coming through, so I also have to think about that, right? And I also now know what to call that stuff that I was totally working up a sweat trying to get rid of 3 days ago, hard pack. It's nice to know what that's called. But anyway, so as an environmental scientist, these are the things that I'm experiencing. And when I go out and I'm talking to community members who are interested in changing salt use, who are interested in understanding how this is changing their aquatic environment, but also possibly their drinking water, I'm understanding that this is a shared problem. This is not just a problem for decision makers. We do expect to get out there on those roads, and we do need to change the way that we think about that. But I think the only way we can do that is by engaging together in a shared forum, so we can understand that the postman is important, we are important, people are important, so is the environment. We all have that idea, how can we get together and really make change? So what I would say is that when we do this kind of bringing together around citizen science, that's community members getting out there, they're doing the science, they're actually engaging with policymakers, they have to take that science and figure out how the heck do I say anything with it to policymakers. I think you end up with a better community. And let's be real, I'm an environmental scientist. I'm also in the community of users, and I do make decisions about my own personal interstate highway in front of my house. So we're all over on this. We're not really separate. We all actually inhabit some of these edges of the triangle. Okay. So I also think that the citizen science that I'm involved in makes my science better. I think that decision makers and the the public have some of the best scientific questions. I can be as creative as I want, but some of the best scientific questions I've heard and acted on have come directly from decision makers asking really applied, that's really nice, but what does that mean for how much salt I buy? Those kind of questions really make me a better scientist. And also, I think that if we are able to engage in these forums, we will come out with better decisions, shared decisions, decisions that we all understand and help to make work. Okay, so some examples of citizen science. It's nice to throw it out there, but what does it look like? In the Hudson Valley, and where I am in Bard College, up near Red Hook, we have a couple of options. We have the Sawkill Watershed Community, which is a gathering of municipal decision makers, public, and some environmental scientists, and even some artists and students that get together who live in the Sawkill Watershed. Okay, and together we talk about our shared efforts to be good stewards of that watershed. And sometimes we talk about what does that mean in terms of the use of salt. We also have the Bard Water Lab, which is a lab that I think we started in 2015 that works with the Sawkill Watershed community to allow citizens to get out there and do their own science and actually take a look. What does it mean? Is road salt going through this waterway? How much road salt? When? And then last, we have THIRST, which is the Hudson River Sub-Watershed and Tributary Research Network, which is a new network that is headed up by Kate Murdoch at Siena College that is bringing together institutions in the valley that are working in the watersheds that they reside in so that we can together build the science that we are able to perform. So this is a map of the Sawkill watershed. It's a very tiny watershed. Maybe if I point something here. Okay, sorry. All right, so it's a very tiny watershed. We've got area of Milan, then Red Hook Town, Red Hook Village, and then the Sawkill moves through Bard College campus and into the Hudson River. This is a map that splits out the watershed in sub-watersheds. And so these basins here, you can see in these different colors, Bob Wills at Dutchess County asked the question, could this be a new way to think about neighborhoods? Is this a way that you could be a municipal decision maker, a practitioner, a scientist, a student, part of the public? If you live here, this is what you're going to be working on. This is what you think about in terms of how you think about salt management, your own personal interstate highways in the front of your house, and maybe how it's applied to the roads. When I first started working with the community, when I was mentioning the scientific questions that the community came up with, as a microbiologist who's really interested in sewage, I was very excited to see this question come up. But here are the questions. Is nutrient loading an issue on the waterway? Are leaky septic tanks contaminating the waterway and aquifer? How do we better manage floodwaters during extreme weather events? Are road salts a problem for our waterway and our drinking water? And is our drinking water protected sufficiently? Now, when the community came up with these questions, I felt relief about this, and I knew a little bit about nutrient loading, but oh my gosh, floodwaters, I don't know, road salts, I'm gonna have to learn about that, and drinking water. That was something that I really was not prepared for. So this has been a learning journey for me. What I've quickly realized is that this question actually relates to all of them, right? So when we're talking about nutrient loading on the waterway, salts can affect the ability of wetlands in particular to process nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus that we don't want in our waterways. Also, when we're talking about these alternative de-icers, we've got possible additions of nutrients to our waterways through that. Leaky septic tanks and sewage effluent also can have high levels of salts, and I'll show you that in a minute. The floodwaters piece is interesting because that definitely affects the shipment of road salts into our waterways. It also can be the reason why, even if you have a shed over your salts, you may lose it, right, if it's not appropriately placed. And with the drinking water, and particularly in the Saukhill watershed, we are seeing higher salt levels in the aquifer that we use to drink water from. And Bard College actually gets its water from the Saukhill itself. So these things, so the road salts covers most of the questions that the community had. The really exciting thing about working in the Saukhill watershed is that it does have a long history of community involvement and science. And we discovered an archive of typewritten data sheets that go from 1976 to 1982 that were gathered by community members working with chemists at Bard College at the time. We were able to digitize those data. Students digitized them, learned the wonders of big data sets and how fun it is to enter them. And they analyzed these data. In analyzing these data, we had chloride concentrations from 1976 to 1982. These are the data thrown all together, and we're looking at month here. So 1976 to 1982, here are the mean chloride levels along the Saukhill seasonally. And as you'll see, it's still in, as Stuart said, it's still in the, it's still above the 10 milligrams per liter that you'd like to see, but we're kind of in maybe nearing wake-up zone, but I think the best thing to take from this is that you see that there's variation of chloride levels in the stream, and that, as Stuart was pointing out, even in 1976 to 1982, we did see high levels in the summer. So we're seeing that movement of salts possibly. Okay, so then the community decided, we've got these historical data, these baseline data, let's get back out there and see what's happening now. Practices around salting have changed. Practices around how everyone's managing their front yard have changed. Let's see what's going on. So we have community members every month that are going out to do the sampling. They bring the samples into the Bard Water Lab for processing. I want to take a brief moment here to say that this person with the awesome boots, that's Susan Ellis, and this is Cheryl Griffiths. They both were key samplers creating these data back in the 70s. So we have full circle community work going on here, okay? And so they are the originals of the Saukhill Water Quality Surveillance Program is what it was called back then. So anyway, so we have students and community members doing the sampling. This is Karen Schneller McDonald. She is the chair of the Saukhill Watershed Community. They're bringing it into what is called the Bard Water Lab, where students and faculty work with community members to process the data that those community members are bringing in. So they process the samples, they show each other how to process those samples, and the data then becomes something that we can work with. So some of the preliminary findings that we have so far is looking at the fact that, okay, this is conductivity. We haven't finished the chloride data yet for the new data set. But from 2015 to 2017, conductivity, which is itself a measurement of salts, but not specific to chloride, you can see that if these are months here, you can see, sorry, we haven't made it out in January yet. It's been pretty awful every January. So I haven't wanted to lose any community members yet. So we have data starting February through December here, and you can see again that in the summer months we have higher conductivity levels. Now those conductivity levels could also be related to sediments that are suspended during those times, but again we're seeing some similar responses. One of the things that has really stood out is that this now is sample site here. And so don't get it confused with the months. But this is sample site. This is the mouth and the Tivoli Bays, and this is headwaters here. And site 6 here is really standing out as having really high conductivity numbers. It also stood out in 1976 to 1982. And it turns out that it is a small stream that drains a wetland that is that has the effluent from the village's very tiny sewage treatment plant coming into it. So we can see that sewage, and that makes me excited, is actually contributing to some of this conductivity issue, and I'd like to learn more about that. Okay, so this is how we've tried to create this citizen science forum. We created the forum, we conducted the science, but then, as I said, I had the town supervisor saying, that's really great, those are nice pictures, how much money do I spend on salts this year? And I said, I really don't know still. So went back to the drawing board and started working with Kate Murdochs to develop the Thirst Network so that we could bring our science together and be able to do modeling, be able to do salt budgeting. We have students coming from Siena College, working with Bard College students to learn how to do this kind of monitoring. And it has allowed us to, I'm going to zip through this just because it's kind of boring, but this is how we do the salts project. Everyone uses the same methods, and we want to characterize these watersheds, look at the flow, and look at conductivity changes. And so we put in these high-res data loggers, and this is just the month of February in 2016, okay? And what I want you to take a look at is this is temperature here, so this is air temperature, water temperature, which stays pretty steady. This is precipitation, so we have a big precipitation event right here, and you'll see that we get a spike in conductivity, quick spikes that then go away. They go away more quickly at the mouth than they do at the sensor we have right by the dam, where waters are slower moving. And so we think we're beginning to figure out how to capture some of the signs of salts moving through the stream. The same is true in our bioswale. We have a permeable pavement parking lot. We have students monitoring that. And whereas before a storm, you have very low salinity, after a storm, you can see through this bioswale, this constructed wetland, you can see the movement of a salt front about 3 days later. So we're working on those projects as a way to educate students, community, and us about the practices that we use on campus. We will also be connecting this to geospatial data that Siena students have been looking at in the Chromachil, Patroon, and the Sawkill. So my question to you is, do you believe me? Do you think this sort of work, this gathering community members together, because let's be honest, I'm out there sampling too as a scientist. We've got sometimes our town supervisor, our CAC members out there sampling with us. Do you think that this can help us move forward? Do you think it can help us address this so that we all understand that it is important that my postal worker does not fall because of me? And it's also important that I figure out the best way to manage that, right? But that it's a shared responsibility. And my question to you is, what more needs to happen to support this? Thank you. Am I over? Okay. She's coming.
Recently moved from a town where the highway superintendent or foreman was appointed by the town board to a town where he's elected, and I've noticed a big difference in the accountability and the responsiveness of the town in terms of putting out more salt, so that when somebody gets on the town's Facebook page and says the roads are terrible, or they might say actually the roads are great, thanks for all the salt, that sort of reinforces the behavior of putting out more salt. In the case of the elected superintendent, I'm wondering if you're seeing anything like that.
I can't tell you what the effect has been yet, because we're still in the beginning stages. What I can say is that the work that we've been doing together as a community has really helped us better understand how to communicate with our elected officials around these kinds of issues. Because what I think someone mentioned that DOT maybe never gets positive feedback. I mean, that's true. So we need, I think there needs to be more communication, I guess, and it needs to be communication that is purposeful. And from the watershed community's perspective, we have those people in the room with us when we talk about these issues. So that's one of the key things, I think, is that we can have dialogue right there in the room about these things. And I think building that kind of community is more helpful than the social, what is it, the social media. Sorry, I'm not on Facebook, so I'm really not going to help with that part.
I'm just curious, I know we've been, the format is not to identify, black hats and white hats, good and bad, but I'm sort of a troublemaker by nature. I can't help myself, and I'll try not to, specifically point fingers. But what about, what impact does the federal government have on all of what we're trying to do locally, municipally, statewide, and all of that in terms of undermining environmental and ecological efforts?
Oh, that federal government, yeah.
Yeah.
I think what, and this is interesting. This is what I said last November. I was here 2 days after the election. I think the last time I spoke at Cary Institute. It just really underscores for me just how important it is to organize locally and to become a community locally. It isn't like before the election we had great policies around this stuff. We were still struggling with these kinds of issues, and we still did not have great communication between decision makers, environmental scientists, and community. So for me, in a way, this is one of the really hopeful things when things seem a little tough, is that I think that this is the answer no matter who is at the White House. We really need to do this sort of local work, and I think Josh mentioned that as well. It's really important that we're on the local level with this. It's specific to each community, and we really need to focus there. And I think hopefully the White House may follow at some point.